For 2,000 years, art and tradition have shown us Mary, mother of Jesus, as a young teenager, barely 12 to 16. But what if that image is a lie? A carefully constructed narrative hiding a historical truth the Vatican needed to suppress? Evidence from archaeology, ancient texts, and first-century Jewish customs suggests Mary was actually a mature adult woman, perhaps 18 to 25, when she conceived. Why was this crucial detail hidden? Why did the Church promote the image of a child bride? This isn't conspiracy theory. It's a historical investigation into the reasons behind one of Christianity's best-kept secrets. Discover the truth behind the iconic image. Before we begin, I want this to be more than just a video. I want it to be a gathering of truth seekers. If you are facing any struggle in your life, any battle, or any pain, I invite you to write your prayer request in the comments now. We are a community that believes in the power of prayer, and we will lift you up. If you feel this calling to uncover what was hidden, comment with the words, "Reveal the hidden age." Your support is what makes this mission possible. Please, like this video to help this truth reach more people, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single step of this incredible journey through forgotten manuscripts. Now, prepare yourself. We begin by deconstructing the image we thought we knew. For almost 2,000 years, Christian tradition has presented us with a very specific image of the Annunciation and the birth of Jesus. Central to this image is Mary herself, pictured almost universally as a young teenager, probably between 12 and 16 years old, when the angel Gabriel appeared. This image of the young virgin, the Parthenos, is deeply rooted in our culture. We see it everywhere, in the delicate brushstrokes of Renaissance masters like Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael. They portrayed Mary with the features of a very young girl, embodying innocence and purity. Hollywood has perpetuated this vision in countless films depicting the nativity story. Our Christmas cards, our children's Bible stories, even many history books, all reflect this interpretation. The image is so pervasive, so ingrained, that we rarely, if ever, stop to question its origin or its historical accuracy. But where exactly did this specific detail, this precise age range of 12 to 16, actually come from? The answer might surprise you, because Mary's specific age is never explicitly mentioned in any of the 4 canonical Gospels. Neither Matthew, nor Mark, nor Luke, nor John provide this information directly. The Bible itself is silent on her exact age at the time of conception. So how did this idea become so firmly established, treated almost as historical fact? The tradition rests primarily on 3 main pillars, none of which are the canonical Gospels themselves. The first, and perhaps most influential pillar, comes from later apocryphal texts, writings that were not included in the official New Testament canon. The most significant of these is the Proto-Evangelium of James. Likely written in the mid-2nd century, well over 100 years after the events it describes, this text offers elaborate, devotional details about Mary's early life. It describes her miraculous birth to elderly parents, Joachim and Anne. It claims she was brought to live in the temple at the tender age of 3, and crucially, it states she was betrothed to Joseph when she was 12 years old. This text became incredibly popular in early Christianity, especially in the East. It filled in the gaps the Gospels left blank, providing a satisfying, pious narrative. But we must be clear, the Proto-Evangelium is not history. It is a work of religious devotion, written long after the fact, likely reflecting the beliefs and ideals of its time, not necessarily the reality of the 1st century. Its claims about Mary's age served a specific theological purpose within the text, emphasizing her lifelong purity and dedication from childhood. The second pillar supporting the tradition is based on presumed marital customs of 1st century Palestine. For centuries, it was widely assumed, based partly on later rabbinic interpretations and comparisons with other ancient cultures, that Jewish girls typically married very young, often shortly after puberty. Therefore, the reasoning went, if Mary was betrothed to Joseph, she must have been a teenager, likely in her early teens. However, as we will see in the next section, modern archaeological and anthropological research is painting a far more complex and different picture of marriage practices in first-century Galilee. This assumption of universal child marriage is increasingly being challenged by evidence. The third pillar involves the influence of early church councils and the development of Marian dogma. As the Church formalized its doctrines about Mary, particularly her perpetual virginity and later the Immaculate Conception, the image of the young virgin became theologically convenient. It powerfully symbolized absolute purity, innocence, untainted by the world, and complete, unquestioning obedience to divine will. A young girl, barely past childhood, seemed to embody these concepts more perfectly than an older, more experienced adult woman might. It was an image that resonated deeply with the faithful and reinforced certain doctrinal interpretations about grace and sinlessness. But here is the core problem we must confront. Traditions, even the most sacred and beloved, are not necessarily historical facts. They are interpretations, layers of meaning added over time, shaped by cultural contexts, political needs, and the specific theological goals of each era. The tradition of Mary as a 1-2 to 1-6-year-old solidified because it served these purposes well. It created a powerful symbol. It fit the developing doctrines. It resonated emotionally. But modern academic studies, using tools unavailable to previous generations, have begun to seriously question this traditionally accepted version. Anthropological analysis, archaeological discoveries, deeper linguistic studies of the original texts are revealing a very different picture from the one handed down to us for centuries. The truth is, Mary's age, when she conceived Jesus, may have been deliberately obscured or significantly misinterpreted, and this likely did not happen by chance. There were specific reasons, theological, cultural, perhaps even political, why the image of the young teenager was emphasized, while evidence pointing to a more mature woman was left in the shadows. The image of the teenage Mary, solidified over centuries, became the accepted truth. But tradition is not always history. To find the historical Mary, we must turn to a different kind of evidence. Evidence buried beneath the soil of Galilee, waiting patiently for centuries. Modern archaeology has become a revolutionary tool. It allows us to understand how people truly lived in biblical times, beyond the idealized narratives, beyond the theological filters. And when we apply archaeological discoveries to the marital customs of first-century Palestine, a very different picture begins to emerge. A picture that challenges the teenage virgin myth at its very foundation. Excavations at sites like Nazareth, Capernaum, Sepphoris, and other Galilean villages have unearthed fascinating evidence about social structure, family customs, and the real lives of women at the time of Jesus. These discoveries suggest that first-century Jewish marital patterns were far more complex and varied than the simple assumption of universal child marriage. Let's look at the evidence for marriage age. Analyses of family tombs and funerary inscriptions from the Roman period often suggest that while engagements, irusin, could be arranged early, the actual marriage, nisuin, the point when the couple began living together, frequently occurred when women reached a more mature age, often late teens or early 20s. Archaeological discoveries in Jewish necropolis sites of the era provide stark biological data. Skeletal analyses, focusing on indicators of first childbirth, show evidence that women who died during or after childbirth were, on average, older than the traditional narrative of Mary would suggest, often in their late teens or early 20s at the earliest. Child marriage certainly happened, but it might not have been the universal norm, especially for first births. Particularly interesting are the findings at Sepphoris. This was a major, thriving city, located just 6 kilometers, a short walk, from Nazareth. It was the administrative capital of Galilee for a time, far more cosmopolitan and Hellenized than tiny Nazareth. Archaeological studies reveal a vibrant Jewish society interacting significantly with Greco-Roman culture. These Hellenistic influences may well have impacted local customs, including potentially delaying marriage ages compared to more isolated, traditional communities. Mary, living so close to Sepphoris, would likely have been aware of and possibly influenced by these broader cultural currents. Furthermore, Discoveries of marriage documents, preserved in the dry climate of caves near the Dead Sea, offer concrete legal evidence. While often fragmentary, these ketubahs, marriage contracts, dating from periods close to the 1st century, frequently involve women who appear to be in their late teens or 20s, not young adolescents. These legal documents provide invaluable snapshots into when marriages actually occurred within the Jewish culture of the period. Another crucial aspect revealed by archaeology is the structure of family homes. Excavations consistently show that Galilean Jewish families often lived in multi-generational housing complexes. Several generations coexisted, sharing courtyards and resources. This suggests a strong clan-based social structure. Important decisions, like arranging marriages, were likely made not just by the immediate parents, but involved the input and approval of the entire extended family. Such a structure naturally favors more careful consideration, ensuring the young woman was fully prepared, physically, emotionally, and socially, before the marriage was consummated. It argues against hasty marriages immediately after puberty. This archaeological evidence also reveals that the family economy was more complex than traditionally assumed. Women were not merely confined to domestic chores, they actively participated in commercial and productive activities. This is particularly relevant for Mary's family. Joseph was a tekton, a craftsman, builder, or artisan. Artisan families often operated as economic units, where women contributed significantly. Studies specifically on the textile trade in the Galilee region during the 1st century provide compelling evidence. Findings suggest that women frequently managed or significantly contributed to family businesses related to weaving, dyeing, and selling textiles. This would require not only technical skill, but also commercial acumen, social negotiation skills, and a level of maturity and experience that a young teenager would hardly possess. Mary, growing up in an artisan household, likely received years of training in skills necessary for the family's economic survival, suggesting a longer period of preparation before marriage. Archaeological discoveries also shed light on the social status of women. Contrary to later interpretations that often minimize their role, evidence suggests women in 1st century Palestinian Jewish society could be more influential than previously thought. Inscriptions found in synagogues from the period occasionally mention women in positions of community leadership or as significant donors, indicating a level of social respectability and influence that usually came with maturity and established family status. Analyses of ossuaries, stone boxes used to store bones found in Jewish family tombs, often contain inscriptions identifying women, not just by their relationship to men, wife of, daughter of, but sometimes by their personal achievements or social positions. This suggests a society where women could, and did, develop more independent identities beyond just their familial roles, a process that takes time and maturity. Now, it is crucial to state, these archaeological discoveries do not definitively prove Mary's exact age. We haven't found her birth certificate buried under Nazareth, but what they do achieve is the establishment of a cultural and social context, vastly different from the simplistic assumption that all girls married at 12 or 13. They paint a compelling picture of a society where adult, mature women played crucial economic, social, and familial roles. A society where delaying marriage until the late teens or early 20s was plausible, perhaps even common, especially in a region like Galilee with its unique cultural interactions. This archaeological backdrop makes the traditional narrative of a 1-2-year-old Mary seem less like a historical certainty and more like one possibility, among others. And it makes the alternative, a Mary in her late teens or early 20s, appear far more consistent with the world she actually inhabited. When we combine this emerging archaeological picture with the analysis of ancient texts, an interesting pattern begins to form. A pattern suggesting that the traditional story might indeed be a later simplification, not an accurate reflection of 1st century historical reality. Archaeology gives us the physical stage, the world Mary inhabited. But to hear her voice, or at least the echoes of how she was remembered, we must turn to the ancient manuscripts. And here too, beyond the official, sanitized versions, we find fascinating clues, rarely discussed in popular circles, that challenge the traditional image of the teenage Mary. The Proto-Evangelium of James, though non-canonical and written later, is one of the oldest texts providing details about Mary's early life. While tradition cherry-picked the betrothed at 12 detail, a closer reading reveals ambiguities. Linguistic analyses suggest it may preserve fragments of much older oral traditions, perhaps imperfectly. Its portrayal of Mary, while emphasizing purity, also hints at a maturity and resolve beyond that of a typical child. Coptic manuscripts discovered in Egypt, preserved in isolated monasteries, contain narratives about the Holy Family that differ significantly from the Western versions. Some of these texts suggest Mary possessed a level of wisdom and spiritual maturity that seems unusual for a young teenager, even by the standards of the time. They hint at a deeper understanding, a more active role than the purely passive vessel often portrayed. Particularly intriguing are the differences between the oldest versions of the canonical Gospels and later translations or interpretations. Certain Greek words used to describe Mary can carry multiple layers of meaning. The term parthenos, traditionally translated as virgin, could also simply mean young woman or unmarried maiden, without necessarily implying an adolescent age in every single context. While Mary's virginity at conception is a core doctrine, the age associated with that state might have been read back into the term parthenos by later tradition, more strongly than the word itself always demanded. Analysis of Syriac manuscripts, representing some of the oldest translations of the Gospels, present linguistic nuances, suggesting alternative interpretations of Mary's status and maturity. These texts, preserved by Eastern Christian communities less influenced by Rome, sometimes use terminology that indicates a young adult woman rather than extreme youth. Gnostic texts, though rejected by the official church, preserved alternative traditions about Mary that deserve academic consideration. The Gospel of Mary and other manuscripts discovered at Nag Hammadi present a Mary figure, often associated with Sophia, divine wisdom, possessing characteristics of leadership, spiritual insight, and profound understanding, more consistent with an adult, experienced woman than a naive girl. While these texts focus more on Mary Magdalene, the underlying elevation of the feminine divine principle challenges the patriarchal assumptions that shaped the image of Mary the Mother as well. Christian Arabic manuscripts, particularly those preserved by ancient communities in the Middle East, contain versions of the Nativity story, with unique details. Some of these texts describe Mary as possessing specific knowledge of medical and obstetric practices, skills that typically required years of experience, passed down through generations of women, suggesting a level of practical maturity. Recent discoveries of papyri in European museum archives have revealed fragments of early Christian texts previously uncatalogued. Some fragments contain references to Mary's experience and wisdom in ways that seem inconsistent with the narrative of a sheltered, naive teenager. Paleographic analyses, the study of ancient handwriting performed on Byzantine manuscripts, show evidence of systematic alterations over the centuries. Certain words related to Mary's age, maturity, or even her active role appear to have been changed or corrected by later scribes. These changes weren't random errors. They follow patterns, suggesting deliberate editing to conform the texts to evolving theological interpretations, particularly the emphasis on extreme youth and passivity. Codices preserved in monasteries in Ethiopia and Armenia contain versions of early Christian history, rarely studied by Western academics until recently. These manuscripts, isolated from the later influences of the Roman Church, have preserved traditions potentially closer to the original versions, including details about Mary that differ from the Western narrative. Ancient liturgical texts, hymns and prayers used in early Christian worship also provide important clues. Some of these documents describe Mary using language that suggests spiritual and social maturity. They emphasize her strength, her courage, her profound understanding, characteristics more readily associated with adult women than with young adolescents. Particularly relevant are comparative studies across different manuscript families. When scholars compare the Greek, Latin, Coptic, Syriac, Armenian, and Ethiopic textual traditions, side by side, interesting patterns emerge. They reveal how Mary's narrative was transmitted, adapted, and in some cases, clearly modified as it moved through different cultures and different theological priorities. The reality is, the ancient manuscripts, when examined carefully and without preconceived biases, paint a much more complex and nuanced picture of Mary's story than the simplified version we generally learn. These texts don't offer a single, definitive, alternative age, but they consistently provide details, linguistic nuances, and narrative elements that challenge the traditional image and open the door to the possibility of a more mature, experienced Mary. When combined with the archaeological discoveries and our understanding of the cultural customs of the time, a compelling alternative narrative truly begins to emerge. The whispers in ancient manuscripts and the stones unearthed by archaeologists already paint a compelling picture of a more mature Mary. But perhaps the most surprising clues have been hiding in plain sight all along, within the pages of the 4 canonical Gospels themselves. When we read these familiar texts, without the ingrained assumption of a teenage Mary, certain details leap out, suggesting an adult woman, educated, capable, and acting with agency. Let's start with the Gospel of Luke, which gives us the most detailed account of the Annunciation. When the angel Gabriel addresses Mary, he uses the Greek term kekarito mene, often translated as full of grace or highly favored. Linguistic studies suggest this term implies more than just divine favor. It carries connotations of spiritual maturity, completeness, a state achieved through growth and experience, arguably unusual for a very young teenager, but fitting for a young woman recognized for her piety and depth. Then there is the Magnificat, Mary's powerful song of praise, recorded in Luke chapter 1, verses 46 to 55. Read it closely. This is not the simple prayer of a naive child. It is a sophisticated theological declaration demonstrating a profound knowledge of the Hebrew Scriptures. It weaves together direct references and allusions to the Psalms, the prophets like Isaiah, the historical traditions of Israel, and the story of Hannah in 1 Samuel. To compose such a biblically rich and theologically astute hymn would suggest years of religious education, deep spiritual reflection, and intellectual maturity. While exceptional piety can exist at any age, the depth and breadth of scriptural knowledge displayed here strongly favor an educated young adult woman rather than an adolescent with limited formal study. The Gospel of Matthew offers different but equally intriguing clues. His genealogy of Jesus notably includes 4 Old Testament women: Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah. The inclusion of women in ancient genealogies was rare. Why these specific women? They were all figures who acted boldly, often unconventionally, playing active, mature roles in the unfolding of salvation history, sometimes amidst scandal or complex situations. Exegetical analyses suggest Matthew might be intentionally highlighting these women to subtly prepare the reader for the active, mature, and unconventional role Mary herself would play, placing her within a lineage of strong, decisive women, not passive children. John's Gospel, while not narrating Jesus' birth, provides details about Mary's later life that are consistent with an adult, experienced woman. At the wedding at Cana, as we explored in a previous investigation, Mary doesn't just notice the wine has run out. She takes the initiative to solve an embarrassing social crisis, instructing the servants with clear authority. Image depicting Mary instructing servants at Cana. These social skills, this decisive action, this command presence are far more typical of a mature matriarchal figure managing a household situation than a newlywed teenager simply attending a party. Let's revisit the visitation account in Luke chapter 1. Mary travels to visit her relative Elizabeth, who is described as elderly. Luke portrays their meeting as a joyful encounter, filled with prophetic utterances. But the nature of their interaction, the deep sharing of their miraculous pregnancies, the mutual understanding and support, suggests a conversation between 2 adult women navigating extraordinary circumstances together, rather than an elderly woman merely comforting a frightened child. Joseph's behavior in Matthew's Gospel also provides crucial clues When he discovers Mary's pregnancy before their marriage is finalized, Matthew reports that Joseph, being a righteous man, intended to divorce her quietly. According to Jewish law at the time, betrothal, erusin, had nearly the same legal force as marriage, nisuin. Ending a betrothal required a formal writ of divorce. The fact that Joseph considered this legal action strongly suggests that Mary possessed the legal status of an adult woman capable of entering into and being released from a binding marriage contract independently. Laws regarding minors were different, typically involving parental negotiation. Joseph deals with Mary as a legal adult. Consider also the conspicuous absence of Mary's parents, Joachim and Anne, from the canonical gospel accounts of the Annunciation, the birth, and the subsequent events. While immensely popular in later traditions like the Proto-Evangelium, they are simply not there in Matthew or Luke. If Mary had been a very young girl, say 12 or 13, one would culturally expect her parents to be central figures in arranging the marriage, responding to the angelic announcement, accompanying her journey to Bethlehem. Their absence could suggest Mary was already an independent adult, perhaps living within Joseph's extended family household after betrothal, or even operating somewhat autonomously. The very terminology used to describe Mary in the Gospels is relevant. Words like gine, womb, used respectfully by Jesus at Cana and on the cross, are consistently employed, rather than specific terms like pais or korashon that would clearly indicate a young girl or child. These linguistic choices, while perhaps not definitive proof on their own, contribute to a cumulative picture consistent with adulthood. Luke's account of Jesus' presentation at the temple describes Mary and Joseph meticulously fulfilling all the requirements of the law. This suggests a detailed knowledge of complex Jewish religious practices and the recognized capacity to assume full religious responsibilities, characteristics again more associated with mature adults than young adolescents navigating such profound events. Finally, in John's Gospel, during the crucifixion, Jesus entrusts Mary to the care of the beloved disciple. If Mary had been a very young woman at Jesus' birth, she would still likely have had other family members alive, perhaps even Joseph's relatives if he had passed. Entrusting her to a disciple outside the family might suggest she was an adult woman, capable of forming new, chosen family relationships, rather than needing to be returned to her parents or extended kin. When we examine the Gospels through this analytical lens, stripping away the later artistic and traditional assumptions, we realize they do not contradict the possibility of an older Mary. Indeed, numerous details, her scriptural knowledge, her actions at Cana, her legal status implied by Joseph's response, the terminology used, the absence of her parents, make more sense, if interpreted as describing a young but fully mature and capable adult woman, likely between 18 and 25, rather than an inexperienced, dependent teenager. The clues were there all along, hiding in plain sight. The clues suggesting a more mature Mary, hidden within scripture, archaeology, and ancient texts, are compelling. So why did the image of the young teenager become the irrefutable dogma? The formation of the official narrative about Mary did not happen in a vacuum. It was shaped by specific political, theological, and cultural forces operating during the crucial early centuries of Christianity as the Church transitioned from a persecuted sect into an imperial power. Understanding these influences is key to grasping how certain interpretations were elevated while others were systematically suppressed. The early ecumenical councils, particularly the councils of Nicaea in 325 AD and Ephesus in 431 AD, were pivotal. While Nicaea focused on Christ's divinity, Ephesus was intensely focused on Mary. The central debate was whether Mary could rightly be called Theotokos, God-bearer, or Mother of God. This wasn't just a theological nicety, it had huge political implications. Declaring Mary Theotokos affirmed the full divinity of Christ, countering opposing views and helping to unify the diverse Christian traditions under a single, imperially backed interpretation. And the image of the pure, young, passive virgin served these unifying, imperial goals far better than a more complex narrative about a mature, possibly independent adult woman. A young, obedient Mary resonated perfectly with Roman ideals of female virtue, social order, and imperial stability. She became a powerful symbol, not just of piety, but of the Church's desired relationship with its faithful, unquestioning acceptance of divine will as interpreted by the Church hierarchy. Studies of 4th and 5th century Roman imperial politics reveal that emperors like Constantine and his successors had a vested interest in promoting versions of Christianity that were orderly, hierarchical, and palatable to the empire's diverse populations. The simple, inspiring narrative of the young virgin was far more useful for imperial unity and mass catechesis than exploring nuanced historical details or potentially divisive alternative traditions. The influence of Eastern versus Western Marian traditions also played a role. Different regions of the Christian Empire held varied local traditions about Mary. The process of unifying these traditions under Roman authority often involved suppressing or modifying versions that did not conform to the emerging official narrative favored by Rome and Constantinople. Traditions hinting at an older Mary, perhaps preserved more strongly in some Eastern communities, were sidelined. Documents preserved in the Vatican archives, some only recently accessible to researchers, show that discussions and debates about Mary's age and status continued quietly for centuries. Behind closed doors, certain papal letters and conciliar decrees indicate that knowledge of alternative traditions existed, but conscious decisions were made not to emphasize them. The development of the Marian cult during the Middle Ages also retroactively influenced interpretations of Mary's life. Influential saints like Bernard of Clairvaux and theologians like Thomas Aquinas promoted specific views of Mary's perfect virginity and purity, views which required a narrative of extreme youth to be theologically and emotionally convincing. The image fed the doctrine, and the doctrine reinforced the image in a self-perpetuating cycle. The role of monastic orders was crucial in preserving and transmitting texts about Mary. While monasteries often possessed vast libraries, including manuscripts with alternative versions of the Marian story, the dominant orders overwhelmingly chose to copy and disseminate only those versions that conformed to the established official doctrine. Alternative viewpoints simply weren't reproduced and gradually faded from common knowledge. Papal politics during the medieval period also played a role. Popes like Innocent III and Gregory VII used specific Marian devotions to consolidate papal authority over local bishops and secular rulers. The narrative of the young, obedient virgin served as a powerful model for the desired obedience to ecclesiastical authority in Rome. Liturgical reforms over the centuries systematically removed or modified prayers, hymns, and readings that might suggest alternative interpretations of Mary. These changes weren't accidental stylistic updates. They often followed specific directives from Rome or major councils to conform local liturgical practices to the central, standardized doctrine. The role of the Inquisition in suppressing alternative texts and traditions also cannot be ignored. While primarily focused on major heresies, inquisitorial documents show that communities preserving non-conforming Marian traditions sometimes faced investigations and intense pressure to alter their beliefs and practices. During the Counter-Reformation, especially after the Council of Trent in the mid-16th century, there were systematic efforts to standardize all narratives about Mary. This included not only official doctrines, but also artistic representations, liturgical traditions, and even approved forms of popular piety. Any deviation was suspect. Even missionary considerations shaped the narrative. As Christianity spread to cultures with different marriage practices and views on female roles, missionaries often emphasized aspects of Mary's story, particularly her youth and purity, that resonated with local values or were deemed less controversial. The reality is clear. The official narrative about Mary, the image of the very young teenager, was shaped by far more than purely theological or historical factors. Political expediency, the need for ecclesiastical unity, imperial pressures, the consolidation of papal power, and missionary goals all contributed significantly to establishing and maintaining a specific, simplified version of the story, a version that may not fully reflect the complex historical reality of the first century. After examining the archaeological evidence, the ancient manuscripts, the Jewish cultural context, the clues within the Gospels themselves, and the political influences that shaped the official narrative, one compelling conclusion emerges. Mary was most likely between 18 and 25 years old when she conceived Jesus, not the traditionally assumed 12 to 16. This conclusion isn't based on a single, speculative piece of evidence. It arises from multiple, converging lines of inquiry across various academic disciplines. First-century Jewish marital customs, family structures, women's economic roles, all point towards a later age for assuming adult responsibilities. Textual analysis reveals linguistic nuances and narrative details within the Gospels more consistent with a mature young woman. Archaeological findings provide a concrete backdrop challenging the assumption of universal child marriage, and the historical reasons why the image of the young virgin was promoted, involving theological convenience and political necessity, become clearer. This revelation does not diminish Mary or her unique role in Christian history. On the contrary, it can profoundly enhance it. An adult Mary, who consciously chose to cooperate with the divine plan, demonstrates a mature faith, a deliberate, courageous decision, rather than simply the passive obedience of a child, perhaps not fully understanding the implications. A woman in her early 20s, in first-century Jewish culture, would have been considered young, but fully mature. She would have spent years learning domestic skills, studying religious traditions, developing the wisdom necessary to assume full family responsibilities. This more mature Mary also provides a more relevant and inspiring model for contemporary Christian women and men. Instead of an almost unreachable ideal of adolescent purity, she represents an adult, grappling with an extraordinary divine call, within the context of real life, making conscious choices, demonstrating agency and profound faith. The truth about Mary's age also has implications for understanding the Holy Family. Joseph and Mary, as mature adult partners, present a model of Christian marriage based on mutual cooperation, shared decision-making, and navigating unprecedented challenges together, rather than simply the image of an older man protecting a child bride. Most importantly, this investigation demonstrates that historical truth and spiritual truth can harmoniously coexist. A more precise understanding of the historical context of the Incarnation can actually deepen our appreciation for the mystery of cooperation between the divine and the human. Mary's true age does not change the central fact that God chose to work through a human woman to enter history. But understanding who this woman truly was, a mature, educated, capable adult, can enrich our understanding of how God works through real people in specific historical circumstances. This journey of discovery does not end here. This is just the beginning. If this investigation into Mary's true age has touched you, if it has awakened something in your spirit, we want to hear from you. Leave your prayer request in the comments. This is a community of seekers, and we are here to support one another. If you believe these hidden stories deserve to be told, your engagement is crucial. Like this video to show that this truth matters. Share it with someone who is also asking questions. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because the secrets we plan to unveil next go even deeper. What does a mature Mary mean to your faith? Comment below, historical truth matters, or I see Mary differently now. And speaking of truths the Church preferred to hide, our next investigation tackles perhaps the most direct challenge to dogma found right within the Gospels. Did Jesus have brothers? Join us next time as we uncover the family secret the Church tried to erase. The story of Mary reminds us that history is complex, faith is a journey, and the search for truth is a sacred calling. The truth was not lost, it was simply hidden, and now it is being brought back into the light.